Okay, we might get started in a minute. Paul Horwood, are we waiting on anyone, or I know we've got Kelvin Goldstone is an apology, and so is David Hughes. I haven't heard of any other apologies. Have you, Paul?
No, Mayor. I was aware of Councillor Goldstone, at least, but I'm not aware of any others.
Okay, great. Well, I think we might get started. Welcome everyone. Welcome to everyone who's zooming in. Tonight we have some invited guests. We have Karen Braun from the Gawler Business Development Group. I can see Kevin Fisher, board member from the Gawler Business Development Group. Hi, Kevin. I can see Leon Budden, who's also on the board of the Gawler Business Development Group. Elected members, we have Mr. Paul Horwood, who's in charge of finance in the town of Gawler, David Barrett, who's in charge of economic development, communications and business enterprise, and Henry Innett, our CEO of the town of Gawler, Erin Finlay, who's in charge of libraries, sports and everything in between, Ryan Viney, who's in charge of planning and environmental services, and Sam Delena, who is possibly the best engineer in the world. Yeah, but Sam, you're in charge of everything to do with engineering and depot services and lots more. Have I missed anyone? So like I said, welcome elected members. This is a workshop and welcome to anyone who's watching on YouTube. I hope you enjoy this evening's workshop. And I'll just go through some housekeeping. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge that we meet on Kaurna land this evening and that we respect the Kaurna people's spiritual relationship with their country. We also acknowledge the Kaurna people as the custodians of the Greater Adelaide region, and that their cultural and heritage beliefs are still as important to the living Kaurna people today. So this workshop, ladies and gentlemen, has been convened for the purpose of discussing issues that involve COVID-19 financial response. I won't explain COVID-19, I think we all know what that means, and to brief council members and the general community on issues relating to their decision-making function. This session will be used solely for the purpose of information sharing and not for the purpose of debating issues, building consensus positions or otherwise discharging council's deliberative and decision-making functions. We don't have an agenda and we don't take minutes in workshops. And I don't believe, Paul Horwood, that there's any requirement to go into confidence, I don't believe. Is that correct? No, Paul's shaking his head. Yeah, so we have been provided with some briefing materials. So Paul Horwood, I might hand over to you. And if you could just take us through and be in charge of this workshop as we go through it. Yes. Now, what time do you think we'll be finishing the workshop, Paul?
Look, I'd think certainly no later than 9 o'clock, but obviously in the hands of elected members.
Yeah. So we'll aim for 9 o'clock. I think it's good to have an end point.
Yes.
So discussion. So we'll turn our mobiles off. And we'll keep our. I think David Barrett will be in charge of our microphones, etc. And as we know in Zoom, we tend to keep our microphones off. It reduces the feedback and allows the speaker to be heard if that's required. So Paul Horwood, I'll hand over to you now and you can take us through this workshop. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Karen, and welcome all. Welcome members from the Gawler Business Development Group as well. I think the key focus tonight, members, that I want to walk you through initially is relative to Council's proposal in regards to COVID-19 and rates relief for the 2020-21 financial year. Mayor and members, just to set the scene and provide a bit of context, as you'd be aware, in early April, in the initial stages of the pandemic, council's initial immediate response for the community was to enable ratepayers who were experiencing financial hardship or had been forced to close their doors to trade. Council's immediate response was to provide those ratepayers with the opportunity to be able to defer their rate payments for 6 months. However, with the sort of deepening impacts of the crisis, Council then wished to further explore that in terms of the financial response to the stage we're at now, whereby the key proposition is that for the 2021 financial year, from a rates perspective, would be that our gross general rates revenue would increase by in the order of about 2.4%. However, that increase in revenue would then be fully offset by targeted rate remissions to those in our community, businesses or residential, who are experiencing financial hardship as a direct consequence of COVID-19. So that's I guess the fundamental proposition of what we're debating tonight in terms of the proposition with the rates relief and also the economic stimulus package as well. The Mayor and members, I think, for me, one of the key points to this is that each council is responding differently financially to the crisis. You would have seen, as I had as an attachment to the papers circulated, I provided a copy of a recent Advertiser article, which indicated what some metropolitan councils were doing in response to COVID-19. And a lot of councils, or increasingly a lot of councils, are coming out saying they won't increase their general rate revenue, so a 0% increase. Now, for the majority of councils, from what we've seen looking at their draft business plans, is they're looking to simply not increase their general rate revenue, but what different to our proposal is that they're not proposing to provide any rate remissions either. So essentially, in that regard, what those other councils are proposing is that effectively every ratepayer would be standing to benefit from that 0% increase. However, what we're proposing is that we're looking to provide rate remissions, specific rate remissions targeted to those in our community who need it most. And as we've previously talked about, that relates to either businesses who've had to shut their doors from 22nd of March, or individuals who've, as a result of that, lost work, lost jobs, or suddenly become underemployed. So the rate remissions we're proposing are a one-off rate remission for the 2020-21 financial year. Again, emphasising that these are specifically designed and targeted towards those businesses or residents in our community who need the financial assistance, because I think it's important to acknowledge that whilst everyone has been affected to some degree, obviously by COVID-19, financially though, not everyone has been affected. And that's both in a business commercial setting and also from an individual setting. As I put in the papers circulated to members as well, I thought it was also important to reference the fact that there are some other councils as well who are indicating that their response to their community from a rates perspective will be to simply freeze the rate in the dollar. Now, that's the key thing to explain there is that whilst that may sound fundamentally sound in principle, it does not take into consideration valuation movements. So if a council is experiencing or will be experiencing considerable increases in property valuations across the board, if they simply freeze on rate in the dollar and a property's valuation goes up by 3 to 4%, then it invariably automatically translates that property will get a 3 to 4% increase in its rates. So I just thought that's an important point of clarification, because some councils have been coming out saying that they'll be, as a response to COVID-19, will be freezing their rate in the dollar. What we've also done, Mayor and members, as you're aware, is we've had a series of conversations with the Gawler Business Development Group, and again, thank them for coming along tonight. I believe those conversations, I think we've had at least 3 of them now, have been very positive. And I personally thought, well, if we're wanting to propose rate remissions for the commercial sector, well, it made total logical sense to engage early in the piece with the Gawler Business Development Group. So I appreciate their input into that, into this space, because it is a complex proposition. That's because we do want to make sure that we're financially assisting those who need it most. So with regards to the rate remissions, again, there's certainly the commercial businesses factor to be considered, but also recognising that there are residents out there who are also hurting as well. Mayor, I think, look, at this juncture, that sort of summarises in terms of the rate remissions we're proposing, but I think it would be good for the members to hear from members from the Gawler Business Development Group, just based on the conversations we've had. We have circulated to all members, based on those conversations, the proposed suggested rates remission criteria. And just to set the scene in that regard, as represented in the email I sent to you all and board members earlier today, where we've essentially landed at this juncture is we're proposing that the first criteria to be met would be that, and this again is from a business perspective, that if a business was seeking to get a rate remission as a result of financial hardship as a result of COVID-19, the first point of reference would be getting a statement from a registered accountant demonstrating that their profitability has reduced by greater than 30% for the 3-month period from April to June. And then in addition to that, so once they've ticked that box, they would then need to tick one of the 2 following, and that would be that that business is eligible to receive JobKeeper payments from the federal government, or that business physically had to close its doors as a result of the Commissioner of Police direction of 22nd of March 2020. So in short, what that's proposing is there'll be the immediate criteria would be getting that statement, independent statement from a registered accountant, and then either the eligibility for JobKeeper or that business had to physically close its doors. But I think, Mayor, it'd be good to get the insights, thoughts from the likes of Karen, Kevin and Leon. I think I've captured everyone from the group who's here. Get their thoughts on the discussions had, because they're obviously the group representing traders. So I think it'd be beneficial for members to hear their thoughts.
So who'd like to go first, Karen, Kevin or Leon? Not all at once, but I guess you can, Kevin?
I think Kevin does.
Yeah, Kevin, you could be off fighting a fire at any stage. So apparently, if you click, you should.
So you should, yes, yeah,
good day to everybody, all the elected members and staff. The Gawler Business Development Group, we're very pleased with the process that's been undertaken since our first approach to council. We've worked well with staff to come up with this proposal, and it has been further modified in the last day or so with Karen and Karen Braun and staff again yesterday to come up with. There was a little bit of a concern that perhaps we weren't going to be capturing some businesses that weren't directed to close but had been severely impacted as a result of the COVID-19. But I think the clarification on the 3 points, with 2 of them being is a good outcome. We're also pleased that council we looked at council's first approach, which was to immediately provide rate relief in the form of a deferral. And as you're aware, we were concerned that probably wasn't going far enough. Our discussions were quite open and frank with staff last week. And I think we were mindful of it being a process that is easy to implement, which is not too resource heavy on staff and therefore make it unworkable, and also require a set of, if you like, a determination from somebody. So we tried to make that as simple as we could. We believe that the qualified statement from a qualified accountant detailing a loss of profitability over a 3-month period certainly captures those businesses that had that initial downturn in March, April, but then have turned that around as things started to free up. So they may pop outside the parameters, whereas if we had just applied job seeker, job keeper, that may not have been the case. So thanks to everybody there. We are very comfortable with that. There is probably a little bit of concern about the amount of money that has been put aside, because it is determinant on, we've got 560 or 50 businesses and there's 10,000 ratepayers out there. And I don't envy your the elected members trying to navigate their way through how you're going to apply that to the ratepayers of the town. Obviously, that would have an impact if you retain that level at 500. I mean, we're comfortable with the 500. That may well be enough, but we won't know until some of the applications come in. We certainly would like that to flow, the businesses not to be missing out as a result of that. And it is too hard to determine at this point. I'm happy to hand over just for any commentary from Leon Budden or Karen. I don't want to monopolise things, but if you can hear from some other board members, and then maybe if any of you have any questions about how we got to that approach. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. Karen or Leon, who'd like to go first, or one or the other? Karen? Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Redman. Just to confirm what Kevin was saying, we've been really, really pleased with the approach by council to get something happening as quickly as possible for the ratepayers, both business and also residential. And yes, whilst the $250,000 may not be adequate depending on how many people actually put in an application, we feel it's a fantastic first step. And we're hoping that it's going to be enough to go around to everybody to make enough of an impact for it to make it worthwhile for people. That being said, there are businesses who have not been impacted really badly by this pandemic. There are businesses that have actually thrived, and we all know the sorts of businesses that they are. So obviously those businesses wouldn't apply and wouldn't fit the criteria if they did apply. So we feel that the most critical component is the fact that after this particular quarter, the April to June quarter, businesses would have been doing their best for that particular quarter anyway. So getting a statement from their accountant is adequate proof that they have suffered a loss.
Thanks, Karen. Leon, is there anything you wish to add?
No, I think it's all been covered by Kevin and Karen quite well. I'm keen to see how tonight progresses. I'm keen to see some results, because I know the businesses out there are really starting to feel the pinch at this time. So I don't have anything specific to add.
Thanks, Leon. Thank you, Kevin. Unmute.
Just one other thing that we're very happy with the rate remission process. And I just flagged this for the elected members' benefit. Also, there was a correction, Karen. It's 500,000. I understand has been put. If Paul nods, that would be
That's right. Yeah.
Has been put aside for a bit over 500 actually. Just flagging at this point that this is a really good approach, but there may well need to be some sort of a stimulus for some businesses going forward into the new year as the JobKeeper, JobSeeker packages both fall away in September. We expect that there will be some more impacts from that flowing on to our businesses. I don't know what that can form, but I'm just flagging that with elected members. Look, we'd really love for some of that $2 million that has been put aside, but we are quite aware that that is infrastructure spending, and there is a hope that that will be circulated through the businesses in the town. Will make a comment also about the approach of putting some money, I believe, to some of the sporting clubs. I think that is a good approach because the sporting clubs are very good at spending the money locally. They tend to use their own tradesmen to get everything done. So I commend whoever came up with that idea. I think that's probably a good way of going. But just remind councillors that we may be back knocking on the door with our monthly meetings with Karen and with Henry, and just saying, look, this is what the impacts are, and we really need to think about that. But let's not colour ourselves too much with that. You've got a little bit to get through with that other, and I'd certainly be interested to hear if anyone's vehemently opposed to what has been put forward. Thank you.
Thanks, board members. Thanks for coming along and giving up your time. It's really appreciated. And I think the collaborative approach is really delivering some outcomes. So well done to you guys for all the work that you're doing with the business community. It's quite outstanding. So thank you collectively. Yeah, we can't do it alone. We have to do it together. So well done, everyone on the board, and to you, Karen, as well. Okay. Elected members, have you got any questions at this stage to either Paul's staff or board members, or on the documents that we've, Nathan Shanks, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I just had a question for Paul. Can you just explain how it's going to work when you've got a business renting a premises who has had a downturn, and then the landlord is the rate payer? How does that relationship work? Obviously, we're offering rate relief if the building owner is not the business. How have we counteracted that?
I might get Karen Braun to answer that, because I think you're all over that, Karen, aren't you? How that relationship works.
The majority, Nathan, just to let you know, the majority of the landlords pass the rate fees on to the tenant. So it's part of the outgoings. So a lot of leases say X amount per week or per month plus outgoings. So I would say probably, from what we've been told by the property managers, at least 85 to 90% is landlords pass that fee on. And
is that the onus on the tenant to prove that they do pay the rates to be able to claim through?
Yeah, we did discuss that if that came up and it was questionable, that the tenant would easily be able to get a tenancy agreement or a tenancy confirmation from the property manager, which would show that's what they're paying.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Davies?
Yeah, just a question around the, this allocated amount towards, what people can claim. Is that, so how's that going to work in terms of capping out? Is it like a first come, first serve sort of thing, or would we be informed if it hit a limit and we'd be able to extend it, or like what are the options for if that scenario comes up?
Thank you, Councillor Davies. Paul Hall?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. In relation to that, as we've discussed, we're looking at the full 2.4% increase in gross rates being provided by way of rate remissions to those who need it. on an application basis. So we've now talked about what the application criteria would look for businesses. And I'd be of the view, Mayor and members, that whatever criteria council ultimately finalises with, that upon application we would be, assuming the applicant ticks all the relevant boxes, we would be providing the appropriate rate remission. We're suggesting in the memo, members, that could be potentially in the order of 1/4, 3 months of rates. Now, as you'd be aware, we've set aside a value of what those remissions would amount to in the order of indicatively $530,000. We're also suggesting a cut-off date for applications being the end of the 30th of October. So in answer to your question, Councillor Davies, it wouldn't be, I wouldn't see it as being a first come, first serve, provided that the applicant puts their application in by the due date. We would assess it, that application, and if they meet the criteria, the remission would be provided. Having said that, we would obviously, through our monthly reporting to council, would be providing to you what the value of those remissions would be as they're allocated. But again, emphasise the fact that subject to the criteria being met and the value to which council wants to provide those remissions, that I believe council would have to honour in full the value of the remissions it wishes to propose. So it's not a first come, first serve, and that once the remission value is reached, that the remissions necessarily cease. I think it'd be a case of council would have to honour any applications it receives by the closing date. Does that answer your question, Councillor Davies?
Yep.
Excuse me.
That's awesome. Any other questions at this stage? I don't see anybody's hand going up. Oh, sorry, Councillor Kosh, you waved your hand.
Yeah, just quickly. If I look at business, 50% of the business expenses are wages. With JobKeeper, does that mean that that's taken out? You really are looking at that 50%. So then, is it a 30% drop of that 50% or 30% of the 100%? Because when you really think about it, with the JobKeeper, aren't they actually, the wages are taken out, aren't they?
Oh.
Is that right?
Yeah, through you, Mayor Karen. Look, it might be best, Karen, Brian, if you might be in a better position to answer that, but I would suggest it would be on the 100%, on the basis that the JobKeeper payment that the business would be receiving is essentially being passed on to the employee. But that would be my reading of it.
Karen?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. The JobKeeper payment is for the employees, and even if an employee is normally only doing enough hours to earn, say, $300 a week, they will be receiving the $750. So therefore, the business either pays, gets them to work more hours, or if they work more than those normal hours, the business is still paying out wages over and above the JobKeeper. But I would imagine most would have cut the staff hours down. But no, it would be on the actual profitability of the business. So if the net profits of the business have dropped by 30% or greater, then that's enough of the demonstration.
Thank you. Now, Councillor Shanks, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, just another one for Paul. I was just wondering, are you able to just sort of just reiterate the difference between rate freezing and how, because obviously we're seeing all these articles and councils are doing a good job, I guess, in publicising it in such a way. But are you able just to explain the difference in the direction we're going and how it does actually parallel in some of the rate freezing actions?
Yeah, certainly through you, Mayor Karen. Councillor Shanks, yes, I think it is a good question, because I think it's a question that quite often confuses ratepayers when they get their first rates notice, because invariably they'll see quite often an increase in their valuation. And as members will be aware from what I've previously communicated, 99% of residential properties in Gawler will be getting a valuation increase for the 2021 financial year. So let's just say, for argument's sake, on average, property valuations across the board for town of Gawler were going up by 3% next financial year. So if we were to say that we were going to just freeze our rate in the dollar, what that would mean would be, bearing in mind the rates paid by an individual property is determined by the rate in the dollar set by council multiplied by their property valuation. So there's two key elements in the calculation of a property's rates. So if the council freezes its rate in the dollar, the only way it would achieve a 0% increase in general rates would be if there was no valuation movements for the properties. However, invariably there is always quite often valuation increases. So if there is valuation increases for a particular council and they went up by 3%, and that council simply elected to freeze its rate in the dollar, then all else being equal, that council's increase in general rates will be 3%, because simply as a result of the increases in valuations. However, I think, Mayor and members, it's important that I also clarify for you that the gross initial increase of 2.4% that we're looking at for general rates, then to be fully offset by the rate remissions, that takes into consideration the valuation movements. So it's not a case that we're proposing our general rates revenue would go up by 2.4%, and then in addition to that, whatever additional income we might derive from valuation movements. That's not the case. What we're being transparent with is we're proposing the total increase in general rates initially would be 2.4%, taking into consideration property valuation movements. Now, as I've indicated in the updated email to you today, previously the average increase in residential valuations, for example, was 2.2%. We had a sizable revaluation update from the State Valuation Office on Monday for residential properties. That 2.2% has now marginally increased to 2.28. So what that means, members, is that if council was to increase its general rate revenue by 2.4%, then we would only very marginally have to increase our rate in the dollar to achieve that revenue target. So yes, that's a key point of difference, because yes, there's been different approaches by a number of councils, as I've touched on. A lot of metropolitan councils are simply saying they won't increase their general rate revenue, taking into consideration valuation movements, whereas there are other councils that are saying we'll just freeze our rate in the dollar, and whatever rates we get will be just determined by valuation movements. And I hope Councillor Shanks provides some clarification for you.
It does, and I just had a quick follow-up question. So the 0.12% that we're saying would be a rate rise in the dollar, if I'm saying that correctly, what does that actually equivalent to when we talk about a general household? I know this is going to be a very indicative figure, but I think it's really important that we steer away from rate increase and we factualize that to what that means with a dollar sign in front of it.
Yes, yeah, look, a very good question, because I recognise at the end of the day, invariably when a ratepayer gets their rate notice, I would suspect, and I've been in this game long enough to have heard every sort of question or query in relation to rates, but invariably a ratepayer is looking at the bottom line, dollars that they have to pay. They're most probably really not too interested or too concerned about what the rate in the dollar is. And bearing in mind, members, with the various rating options available to councils now, a comparison of the rate in the dollar from council to council is pretty much redundant, because the key reason for that is councils can either apply a minimum rate like we do, or other councils can apply what they call a fixed charge. And I won't sort of bore you with the intricacies of the differences between the two, but in short, what it means is that those councils with a fixed charge component of their rates, their rate in the dollar applied will automatically be lower than a council that would be applying a minimum rate. So in terms of a gross 2.4% increase for a resident, for example, who hasn't been financially affected by COVID-19, I would suggest that would translate in dollar terms without having actually done the calculation, but I'd suggest on average that might be in the order of about your $40 to $50 a year.
And I think that's the very important part, because you do $40 to $50 divided by 12, and you can really get that down to a monthly expenditure. Mm-hmm. And then what we're trying to say is, look, if that $40 to $50 is life or death for you, then COVID has really affected you, then we're actually going to not only waive the extra that we're asking from everyone else, I say extra, from everyone else, but we're also going to waive the other lump sum as well. So I think, it would be really great to factualise that simply.
Yeah, Mayor, if I could just comment further in that regard, that I think, members, the important point of difference and reference for the proposition we're proposing to you is that, yes, acknowledge that for those who haven't been financially hit by COVID-19, we're seeking a nominal increase in their rates paid, but we are only one of a very small number of councils who are actually proposing rate reductions for those who have been financially hit. And the proposition is, on application, that could be up to a full quarter in rates instalment. So anecdotally, I'm not aware of too many other councils that are actually doing what we're proposing to do, what we're suggesting, because a lot of the councils, as we've touched on, are either electing to have a nominal rate increase across the board, or a zero increase in general rates across the board, but with no rate remissions. And invariably, if they're not having their rate remissions, they're just continuing with the option to defer rates, which, as the Gawler Business Development Group members have acknowledged, that if a business wants to defer its rates, it's not actually reducing the rates, it's just deferring the pain, the financial pain, to a later point in time. And I think, members, what I've also found interesting is that we've had a fairly small take-up with the option for rates deferrals. And I'd suggest it might be for that very reason that people are thinking, well, I'll pay now because I'll simply have to pay more later. So I suspect that might be some ratepayers thinking, but the important difference with our proposal is we are proposing your genuine rates relief for those who need it.
Thanks, Paul. Councillor Kosh, you've got your hand up. I'll just
Yeah, just in general, because we're talking about general figures now. When we send a rate notice, it also includes all the other things, you know, like the NRM levy, the emergency levy, the board levy. So that makes up a percentage of the actual cost, actual fee. If we looked at a quarter, like just an average business, I don't know if you can do that, but what would 1 quarter's remission be from rates? So what figure are we actually looking at waiving for a business? What actual dollar amount?
Yeah, look, through you, Mayor, that's, Councillor Koch, is a sort of difficult one to answer, particularly from a commercial perspective, because not so difficult from a residential perspective, but from a commercial perspective, why it's difficult to answer is just through the sheer difference in the valuations. Now, we've touched on the fact we've only got about 550 commercial ratepayers, but compared to 10,000 residential. But the key point of difference with the commercial sector is you have valuations ranging from less than $100,000 to, and invariably that's for your sole trader operating out of a sort of one room, compared to about a dozen properties that are valued over $5 million.
Yeah.
So there's a vast disparity between the valuations, and as a result, also taking into consideration our tiered rating that we have for commercial properties, there's a subsequent vast disparity between what the top end of town, for want of a better word, like your national supermarkets, for example, they will invariably pay in the order of over $100,000, but they have their valuations are over $5 million each, compared to a small sole trader, for example, who would be paying the minimum rate, which is currently $999. So, look, on average, for your average middle-sized trader, they'll be paying, I'd suggest, in the order of $3,000 to $4,000. So a quarter of that, obviously, could be up to potentially $1,000.
$800, 1624. So what we're really talking about is, but then you need to take off the other ones as well, don't you? Paying still paying those other levies, aren't they?
Yes. Bearing in mind, Mayor and members, what I do need to point out is that the proposition is based on the general rates, not the actual other separate rates and charges, because invariably, whether it's the NRM levy, the Gawler Business Development Group levy, or the Waste Management Service Charge, they're essentially operating under a cost recovery mechanism. And the other point I wanted to touch on too, in terms of remissions for businesses, if you look at the likes of the pubs, who we all know have had to close their doors, and as you recall, we had a number of letters from pubs to the meeting in April seeking financial relief. The rates they pay, obviously, on their valuation isn't in the order of $3,000 to $4,000. That could be in the order of $10,000, $20,000, $30,000, obviously depending on their valuation. So there will be. It's very difficult to say what the average would be, because I would suspect we would be getting applications from the likes of the hotels who pay considerable rates, compared to the likes of a small trader who, for whatever reason, had to close their doors or has had a significant downturn, that the financial impact for them wouldn't be as severe. So,
yeah. I just want to get it in context. So you're probably looking at, for Main Street business, a rebate of say $500.
Yes, it could be $500, possibly a little bit more. Depending on their valuation.
Okay. Yeah, just so people got it clear in their mind, the figures we're actually talking about here.
Yep, correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Okay, so I can't see anybody else's hand up at this stage. So Paul Horwood, Leon Budden and Kevin are both waving your hand. Saw you first, Leon.
Look, sorry, I had to pop out for a second. I had a client signing some documents, but so if I've missed something that I'm about to ask, I apologise in advance. Just a question for Paul, and I missed the last sort of workshop meeting. The $500,000 that you're sort of earmarked for this program, is that split in some way between residential and business? Is there going to be some way that that can be divided, or what's the plan?
Leon, look, I'm not proposing it necessarily be sort of evenly split, for example, but certainly from the sort of indicative analysis I've done, I would suggest at the end of the day, based on the obviously number of applications we get, I suspect that value of just over 500,000 might be slightly in favour, a slightly higher percentage in favour of businesses, simply from the fact that the businesses, particularly the likes of the pubs, pay substantially higher rates than your residential customer. But so, look, indicatively, I'd suggest might be, say, 300,000 potentially for commercial and 200,000 for residential. But in determining that figure, I'm not proposing a cap on either of those sectors. It's just the total value of the pool.
Thank you. Kevin, you had a question.
Yes, just I think Paul got there. I was going to ask if any modelling had been done, and I was aware at our meeting you'd done some limited stuff. I think there was a state, something where you said, look, there were, of the 55 businesses that had applied for currently rate referrals, if they translated through, you gave a figure and said it was going to be X, and we thought, oh yeah, I presume that is what is the basis, if you like, without modelling, that's the basis for your discussion there on 300-200 split type thing. So it sort of answers the question, but I just want to get that in front of the elected members, if that is the case, unless you've got anything further to add. Thanks.
Yeah, Kevin, look, that was certainly part of the thinking, but what I've also done is, obviously, with discussions I had with yourself and Karen, Karen Brown, that is, together, sort of general understanding from the Gawler Business Development Group in terms of how many businesses have been struggling or had to close their doors, but also taken into consideration based on the land use code, land use classifications we receive from the State Valuation Office, and trying to align that to the businesses that physically had to close their doors under the Commissioner of Police direction. So what I'm saying in that regard is that direction from the Commissioner of Police indicated a whole series of business activities that needed to close, and all I was simply trying to do was align those business activities to those same known activities that operate within the town of Gawler, to get a sense of potentially, as a starting point, well, how many businesses physically had to close their doors.
Councillor Fraser, you had your hand up.
Some businesses, smaller businesses that have had to close their doors, they were able to apply for this rate relief, but they may not be eligible for JobKeeper, which means in their own private home, can they apply for it? Because if they're not working, their businesses' doors are shut, they're not eligible for JobKeeper. How can they get rate relief at home as well?
Paul?
Yes, through you, Mayor. Look, as we've touched on, Di, from a business perspective, provided they meet the criteria, they would be eligible for a remission. Now, if for whatever reason they didn't meet that, then there could potentially be the case that they could meet it possibly from a residential perspective, but and in terms of the identifying the potential criteria for residential, that's another conversation that needs to be had, because bearing in mind we do have over 10,000 residential ratepayers. So yes, council does need to sort of turn its mind to, well, what would the criteria be for residential customers as well?
So just on that, you have made mention of that on page 3 of the documents that you circulated, Paul. Are there any questions around that, elected members, around the residential suggestions? There's still a bit more work to be done, I think, Paul Horwood, around that, but certainly there might be some comments. Nathan Shanks and then Di Fraser.
Yeah, I guess it's probably in the same theme that I was asking before, and I do note that you said, I do note that you sort of said to Councillor Koch earlier that residential rates would be easier for you to average out. I guess for all elected members, is it something you'd be able to turn around and say, look, on average per household, we would expect X, and then maybe provide some feedback on that? That would be pretty helpful, I think.
Yeah. Through you, Mayor. From a residential perspective, Councillor Shanks, the average general rates is in the order of about $1,600 for 2019-20. So that's just the general rates component. Then there's the waste management charge on top of that.
Okay, thank you. Now I might go to Di and then to Councillor Ballalong. You put your hand up, Jim.
Okay. Going back to my question before, I understand the business side of it, but some of the small businesses, if they're business ownership, are they all eligible for JobKeeper, or only their business? You know, like they might not have any employees, they might be a sole trader and they've had to shut their doors. Were they eligible for JobKeeper or not? That's where I meant with the residential, because if they're not, well, they can't apply for it at home either.
Mayor, I think Karen Brown's chafing at the bit to answer that one.
Yeah, Councillor Fraser, no, not everyone is eligible, which is why we changed the first criteria from people having to be approved for and receiving JobKeeper payments. Even if, so for example, a sole trader is married, if that sole trader has had to shut their business, their partner is still working and receiving above the threshold, which I think at the moment is $75,000, they're not eligible for JobKeeper at all. They may be eligible for Job Seeker, but that's a much more detailed process for them to go through. And there is actually cut-offs on that, goes on the value of the house. And I think at the moment it's $3,200 a fortnight that their partner can be earning. And if they exceed that, they can't even get Job Seeker.
Okay. So then they're not eligible to even apply for a reduction in their rates?
If they can demonstrate the 30% loss, yes.
Domestic rates, I mean.
Oh,
rates.
I'll pass that over to Paul, but I don't think they'd be eligible to claim the 30% loss on the business and residential. I don't know.
No, that wouldn't be my intent, Di. But council would certainly have to be clear in that regard.
Okay, all right.
Thank you. Now, Jim Ballalong, Councillor Ballalong.
Yeah, thank you. Just want to correct Karen for a little bit. It's not the question I want to ask. It's not the profit that the government is 30% of your turnover. It's got nothing to do with the profit. Just wanted to clarify that. Right. The question I ask is how are we going to let everybody know, you know, residential and business, how are we going to do it as a council to let them know?
Okay, wonderful. Yeah. Paul Horwood, can you respond to that?
Yes, certainly, Mayor. Look, I would be suggesting approach, and would have to very be clear to highly publicise it to get the message out there. And moving forward from here, what we're proposing is that there'd be a special council meeting on the 7th of July, which would be seeking council to endorse the draft budget for the purposes of consultation. And then there'd be a whole series of options we'd be using to communicate that message on social media, website, possibly also town banners across the town. So I think given the nature of the proposition we're proposing, it's fundamentally important that we get the message out there so that those who we are wishing to assist clearly get the message that they can apply for it. So it would be paramount that we would be on the front foot communicating that message, and it would also include obviously having a flyer with the first quarter rates notice and having it prominently advertised there as well.
Thank you, Paul. Now, Councillor Kosh, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to follow up on what Councillor Valonga said, because I suppose it was what I was getting at before was when I look at profitability, it's your return on an input. You buy something, you do something to it, and you get a profit on it. So it's probably not the profitability; it's probably the turnover that you're actually looking at, because it's actually potentially it's a misnomer to call it profitability. Because if you've shut down, you've got no inputs to add any value to make a profit with, if you know what I mean. Yeah. So it's probably actually the turnover that you really need to talk about. Yeah, I suppose that's a bit what I was trying to say before. Yep.
Mayor, I think Leon wants to make a comment.
Oh, Leon?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I think, and I wasn't there, so Kevin can correct me. Yes, there is a distinction between turnover and profit. The JobKeeper specifically looks at turnover, but I think it was our view that we wanted a slightly different criteria of profit, because there's quite a lot of businesses who can demonstrate a reduction in turnover, and we wanted it to link specifically to their profit as a slightly different distinction to the JobKeeper. But I've got another quick question. Which is, what is council proposing to do for multiple tenancies under the one rates notice, where you might actually have, say, 2 or 3 businesses under the one council rate, but one of those businesses would qualify, but the others might not. Is there going to be a mechanism by which that can be looked at or assessed?
Yep, through you, Mayor. Leon, for rating purposes, what happens there is, for example, it might be Gawler Green, for example, or where there's what council's advised of for rating purposes is we get advised of all the individual tenancies, and they're separately rated accordingly. So what happens there is for example, if there's at Gawler Green, for instance, if there's 30 shops out there under the sort of one umbrella, so to speak, we will distribute 30 rate notices. So it's not a case of one rate notice goes to like the landlord and then they have to somehow divvy it up. The information we get provided by the State Valuation Office provides us with those individual tenancies, and they're rated individually accordingly.
Thank you for that question, Leon. I think we might, there is other elements of the economic package that is in our documents. So we have touched a little bit on residential, but we've also got our infrastructure, sport and rec, etc. Package that looks specifically at sporting clubs and community clubs. And also there's a potential proposed list of that the administration have put up around capital works and a couple of non-capital inclusions. So any comments or questions around that? Councillor Fraser, you've got your hand up.
Just in the sport and rec one, I think that's really generous, the $40,000 for each one. The $40,000 for the Williston Oval precinct, would they be able to use that towards their lighting, or would they have to use it on something else?
Paul, there was some discussion forward around just the criteria. So you want to go through that a bit?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Look, what I'd be proposing, members, in that regard is, yes, as you're aware, the proposition for the sporting clubs is a allocation of 200,000, and as I've put in the memo, for the 4 big precincts, proposing that they would be provided with a grant of $40,000 each, and then the remaining 40,000 to be distributed across the remaining sporting clubs. I think what council would need to consider in this process, members, is that but it would have to be by way of a grant process whereby the clubs would have to advise us in advance of what they intend to spend those dollars on. So, for example, as Councillor Fraser, as you touch on, for the Williston precinct, it could be the football club saying, we want to dedicate that 40,000 towards improved oval lighting, as an example. I think council, I would advocate that, yes, council would need to have that process in place so that council can be aware of what each of those precincts is proposing to spend that money on. And then also I'd be advocating that similar to what we do when we provide for grants, that each of the clubs would actually have to provide an acquittal process at the end, demonstrating to council that they've acquitted the dollars we've provided for the projects intended. I think that, to me, that would be a fair and reasonable request, but I think at the outset, the clubs would obviously have to turn their mind to the nature of the projects they would wish the grant to be applied for. And I can't remember who said it earlier, but quite often I would suspect a lot of the clubs, the dollars would be spent with local suppliers and local employment. So, which is a key catalyst of what we're proposing with the stimulus package. But I think it would be reasonable for council to want to have some say in terms of the work so that's actually done, rather than just going to a club and saying, here's $40,000, spend it as you see fit.
I think that provides a bit of clarification, Di, around that. There's any other questions at this stage, elected members? We've got that. Any questions around the proposed administration have put forward some ideas around capital projects, which is part of that layered approach to get economic stimulus back into the community. So any comments? I'll see Nathan and I'll see Di. So I'll go to you first, Councillor Shanks, and then Councillor Fraser.
Yeah, thanks for that. I guess I'll just mainly a comment, and it's probably just sort of building on what Kevin Fisher was saying earlier. And I know conversations I've had with business owners locally, it'd be really good that if we are offering this stimulus to really make sure that we have set the criteria of employing locals first, and really ingrain that in our tender processes. I'm seeing a lot of complications around some of the tender processes and that do go out at the moment around some of our capital work projects, and we have able-bodied services in our town. So I'd really like to sort of simplify the process. So, you know, the sediment of economic growth and really trying to look after our local economy is great, but I really would like to see how we're going to follow that through. So we exhaust all the opportunities we have here locally first, before we leave our borders and employ other trades that don't necessarily live in the area. So that's probably my main comments around that. But yeah, looking forward to seeing what that looks like.
Thank you, Councillor Fraser, and then Councillor Kosh.
Okay, we are talking about attachment 3, aren't we?
Yes, yes.
Yes, okay. I just have some questions. The first one is the storage shade sales. How much, I suppose it depends on the size of them, how much they are, but for 220,000, how many sales would you expect to get?
Sam?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mayor Redmond. Yeah, you're spot on there, Councillor Fraser. It does depend on the area and the playground selected, because sometimes playgrounds can be quite spread. But indicatively, I would suggest that would be at a minimum 2 and possibly 3 playgrounds. Okay.
And another question on the solar panels. What 2 buildings? Which buildings would you be looking at?
Ryan?
Yeah, that would, we still need to investigate that. We obviously have capacity on the rec centre. We have installed a system there, but there is additional roof space capacity there. And we also have been looking at the pool. There is a need in terms of usage, and that's something that we'll be working through with our team to work out the most effective use of solar panels. But that would essentially be able to get in excess of 100 kilowatts system at somewhere, whether that's spread, but 100 kilowatt systems.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Posh, I think.
Look, yeah, I'm happy with that list. In particular, the street lighting, for example, that's a really big ticket on, because if we convert our 3,000 street lights, we're going to reduce our energy consumption in that area by 50%, and overall 25% of our energy consumption overall is going to be reduced. That's a huge saving for us, our community, which then can be reinvested in other activities in our community. It's also good that we're doing the irrigation, because you need to really improve the efficiency of those irrigation systems, because some of them are quite old and just leaking a lot of water and, you know, wasting a lot of energy and, you know, resources. And I think the battery one as well, that's a pretty good one. So there's a really good opportunity to bring forward some of the issues that are coming forward in our climate emergency action plan. So I think that's a really good move. Great.
Thank you. Mr. Delina, do you want to make any comment about Councillor Shank's comments around using locals, which I think is a really good point?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. It's certainly an area that we've providing a significant focus on with respect to presenting this information. I think if you look at attachment 3, to the far right, there is some reference to how we may look at approaching the procurement, and bearing in mind that there are some activities that we just, if you look at that list, that $2 million, some of the works that we've identified, that we will struggle to actually obtain businesses that are in Gawler, and the shade sales might be a classic example of that. But notwithstanding that, it's about the weighting and putting significant emphasis on local economic benefit and demonstrating the quantum of workforce that might live in the area that work for that company that could be assigned to the project. So that's one example. There's some work happening in this space, and I understand when we present the reports back to council, there'll be further information in this regard.
Thank you. Councillor Shanks, you...
Oh, sorry, yeah, I was just raising my hand saying if you need some shade sales, we can definitely look after that for you.
Thank you. Okay, so we've had some commentary around capital projects, sport and rec, business. Do we need to turn our mind to residential? There has been a little bit of commentary around that. Does anyone want to ask any questions or have any comments around that part of the package? Leon.
Just a question. If you have a business owner who also lives in town, will they qualify for both?
I don't believe so, but I'll hand over to Paul. I think there has been discussion around that, Leon.
Yep. Through you, Mayor Karen. Yes, that's something Leon's certainly council would have to be mindful of. That I don't think would be the intent of a business owner who's also a resident, double dipping, for want of a better word. So yes, we'd have to work around how that would work in practice, but the intent is essentially for an individual to essentially be applying once, either from a business or a residential perspective.
Thank you. Now, Councillor Shanks, again.
I just wanted to clarify with some of Paul's comments earlier around the residential rates. Now, if we're looking roughly on average, Paul, around $1,600 a year, I mean, that equates to $133 per month. If we do that by 1650, saying that rates increase is around $50, we're talking per month increase of around $4.50. Am I calculating that all? Am I simplifying that the right way? I know I'm not taking into account the...
He's adding it up at the moment, I think.
Okay.
Yes, Councillor Shanks, I'm just quickly crunching the numbers using an average of, say, generates of in the order of, just to keep it simple, $1,600 for the average residential ratepayer. Obviously, some may pay more, others less. 2.4% of that would translate to $38.40, which is $3.20 a month.
Yeah, so $3.20 a month is what we're looking at residential wise if we do endorse this rate increase.
Yeah, or 80 cents a week.
Yeah, no worries. I think that's very good information to have. Thanks for that.
Thank you. How are we going, everyone? Any other discussion at this stage from the Gawler Business Development Group? Have you got any other comments you want to add? We've had discussion on a whole range of matters. Leon, you've had some really good questions. Karen or Kevin? Kevin, you haven't fought a fire. I did see you go. That was a pretty quick fire you put out.
That's what we do here. We're very efficient. Look, it's good discussion. I'm not privy, I don't think, to the document. I don't think that you're referring to the attachments. And as I said earlier, it will be challenging working out the application of that to the residential sector. But I further ask elected members to support that particular proposal that we've put forward with staff. And we hope that is seen as a first step, at least an immediate one. And also the challenge of council selling that, as Nathan pointed out. It's always difficult when it comes from council to try and sell it as to the community and get them to take it on board. So yeah, look, thank you for everyone's consideration. The board are pleased at this point with what's been occurring, and the consultation just shows. Thank you to Henry and to Paul for that precursor meeting, which I think is really good. We were able to thrash through some stuff, as I said earlier. So thanks again. Thank you to everybody.
Thank you, guys. Okay, any other discussion at this stage? There is...
Mayor, sorry.
Yes.
Sorry, if I could just add further in relation to the discussions we've had with the Karen and Leon and Kevin, was that in relation to the the key part of the criteria being the independent statement from the accountant. I just want to clarify, Karen Brown, that is, you are of the view that the board could assist in that regard in terms of facilitating those statements for businesses that may need assistance in that space?
Yeah, absolutely. That wouldn't be a problem at all. That would just be part of what we've put aside in our budget for assisting businesses. So if they need our help, we will help them.
Fantastic. Okay. Right, I might, we do have some key points on page 6 of these documents. I'm sorry, Kevin and board members, if you haven't got those documents. And there's just some overall key statements there. Paul, do you want to run through, did you want to ask something, Councillor Koch, or you're happy? You're happy with that? Okay. Yeah, Paul, perhaps just briefly go through those key elements, just so that people who
Yes.
might think get an
Yes.
understanding of what our bottom line will be.
Yeah, certainly, Mayor. And look, this is certainly a key point that council needs to take into consideration, because obviously council, the focus has very been on wanting to respond to the COVID-19 in a financial setting and how that might look for businesses and residential customers. And as you can appreciate, having not only the proposed rate remissions, but also bringing onto the table the $2 million economic stimulus package, that obviously will have an impact on council's budget, financial position. And as we've demonstrated to council, we're certainly keen to assist council in assessing its options relative to responding to the crisis in the financial setting. But we have also demonstrated continually that has to be provided in a financially sustainable manner. And in that regard, certainly for the 2021 financial year, if you take into consideration the $530,000 rate remissions we're proposing, in addition to the non-capital related component of the $2 million economic stimulus package, what we're indicatively looking at now is an operating deficit in the order of $1.6 million, which is obviously a sizable deficit, members, but it's important to bear in mind that that's very much sort of a one-off as a response to the crisis. And if you removed the $530,000 remissions and also the $615,000 earmarked as part of those indicative stimulus projects, if you remove those one-offs out of the equation, the operating deficit returns to an indicative value that we were proposing back in March in the order of between $400,000 and $500,000. Which was what council had already believed would be the appropriate budget position for 2021, simply from the fact that the new depreciation that will be incurred from council as a result of the completion of the Link Road in August, September this year, and the depreciation of that alone is about $500,000. So council was already aware of the fact we would be in deficit, operating deficit, for a few years. This is really just a one-off hit to that operating result, purely from the fact of we're wanting to provide financial support to those in our community who need it. When that explains from the recurrent budget position, looking at our overall financial position in terms of the balance sheet, as at 30 June 2021, what we're currently proposing is our net financial liabilities ratio, which is one of our key financial indicators. That would be in the order of about 94%, which would be slightly under council's maximum threshold of 100%. And what that means is across the sector, the maximum threshold is invariably applied of 100%. And what that represents is that council's net financial liabilities, which is essentially total liabilities less current assets, is that ratio result means that the net financial liabilities won't exceed council's total operating revenue for a year. So that's just to explain how that ratio is calculated. In respect of the cash flow position, where the papers presented to members suggest for 2021, again, as a result of the economic stimulus package and the rate remissions, that there would be an increase in net debt in the order of about $4.8 million. Bearing in mind, members, that increase in debt also accounts for the $2.4 million contribution to the Gawler East Link Road that we're obligated to pay. And we have already sent a letter in accordance with Council's resolution seeking the goodwill of the government to waive that contribution. So that's, I'm not sure when we'll hear the answer to that, but that is also part of the key factor behind that increase in debt. Bearing in mind too, from a debt position, that 4.8 mil I've indicated is also to a certain degree informed by the timing of capital works projects across this financial year and next financial year. And I raised that in the context that for 1920, council's net debt will actually come down by approximately $1.3 million. So there's a couple of nuances between the two financial years. And the last point I wanted to make, Mayor, in relation to one of our other ratios, which is our asset renewal funding ratio, and that basically demonstrates is the council investing sufficient dollars in the renewal and replacement of existing assets, and the target being for that ratio being 100%, which demonstrates that council is committing appropriate funding to asset replacement renewal. The ratio result at this point in time is in the order of 107%, which in simple terms means that, yes, we are proposing to expend appropriate dollars in asset replacement renewal, whether that be the likes of road resealing, footpaths renewal, stormwater pipe fixing, etc. So in short, Mayor and members, it's important to recognise that, as members are aware with the discussions we've had, that there will be a one-off financial hit naturally as a result of the proposals in terms of financial relief that council's got on the table as a combination of the rate remissions and the economic stimulus package. And also bearing in mind that, as members will be aware, this will then have a impact longer term on council's capacity to undertake its next major iconic project, whether that be the redevelopment of the Carpethan Reserve or the upgrade of the Gawler Aquatic Centre. Prior to COVID-19, they were indicatively earmarked. The first one of them was indicatively earmarked to occur within the next 4 to 5 years. As a result of this COVID-19 response, that is likely to be pushed out in the order of 7 to 8 years. So there naturally has to be a flow-on consequence, but members have been aware of that. But I think it's safe to say council's immediate goal has been to establish this financial relief measures for people in our community who need it at this point in time. So, Mayor, hopefully that gives a brief sort of summary of the financial statements, the key financial statements tabled to members tonight in advance of an update report going to next week's council meeting. But if members have any questions questions in that regard, I'm more than happy to answer them.
Can you, Paul, can you give us a bit of a timeline of how our budget deliberations will roll over the next couple of weeks?
Yes, certainly, Mayor Karen. Looking forward from here, what we're proposing is further to tonight's discussion, we'll be putting a budget update report to next week's council meeting, purely as an update report. And then we're earmarking a special council meeting on the 7th of July, at which we will be seeking members to endorse the draft budget business plan solely for the purposes of public consultation, and following which we'll do a sort of heavy marketing campaign to promote the various matters we've been talking about tonight for a 3-week consultation period, after which people will be able to provide written submissions and or verbal submissions to a special council meeting earmarked for early August, following which at that council meeting, council could then would then turn its mind to, well, as a result of the feedback received, does it need to adjust the budget accordingly, and then looking at the final juncture being to adopt the budget and the rates for the 2021 financial year at the August council meeting, which I think is the 25th of August, I believe.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks for that. That gives us an indication of what's to come and the steps involved. If there's no further discussion, everyone, I'd just like to thank everyone for attending tonight, in particular Karen Braum, Kevin Fisher and Leon Budden from the Gawler Business Development Group. I'd really like to say thank you on behalf of council, but also on behalf of businesses and all in Gawler for the work that you're doing. Your work has been outstanding. It really, really has. The support you're providing your members is exemplary, and it just can't be overstated. And the work that we're doing together is something to be really proud of, that we're very effectively working together. We're listening to each other, and we, you know, what you've provided as far as feedback, but also you know, input into our budget deliberations has been really, really important. So thank you for all your work in that regard. It really, really does not go unnoticed. So yeah, it really is a heartfelt thanks for all the work that you're doing. And I'm sure businesses would be very, very thankful for all the help they're getting. And it's stunning to see how we're all working together. It's making a huge difference. Henry and I were talking to the governor today. He beams into different council areas, and you never say no to the governor when he wants to have a chat. And it was really a privilege to talk about the work that you guys have been doing, and also some of the other social input that council has been putting in place for our people. So yeah, it was really lovely to hear his feedback around that as well, because he knows Gawler really, really well, has a lot of connections to Gawler. So look, I'd like to say thank you for everyone for coming along. Thank you to staff, Paul Horwood and your team for all your hard work, and everybody in the leadership group of the town of Gawler. Thank you. And I think we might call it a night, everyone, a few minutes early. So thanks everyone, and we'll have an update report at our next week's council meeting. Thanks, everyone. Have a good evening.